Chapter 461, Tamer's War, After Storm 2. Ren was again carrying Larissa, who remained unconscious from extreme magical exhaustion. Her breathing was stable, but her face remained pale, showing consequences of having forced her abilities beyond the limit. The weight in his arms was not only physical, but also emotional, transporting someone who had risked any safety to help him, whose sacrifice had made the difference between success and failure. "Are you sure we'll be safe?" Leora asked, looking toward the horizon where occasional flashes from the aerial battle could still be seen. Julius smiled with confidence. "My father may seem casual," he admitted, "but he's not stupid and won't be defeated. It's complicated to explain, but he has ways of handling situations others would consider impossible." The certainty in his voice carried a childhood of experiences watching the impossible become routine when Dragarian was involved. Luna, who was still processing everything she had witnessed, asked, "And if he has very bad luck today, and something happened to him, then it would be the end anyway?" Julius responded with brutal pragmatism. "There's no one else in the kingdom with power to face the last tamers Xiao has been sending. So heading to the castle will be safe, because when we arrive, things will have already ended one way or another, that's certain." The logic was unforgiving but accurate. Sirius, who had remained silent while carrying Selphira's unconscious body, finally nodded in agreement. Rin was also going to ask something about the king, but the conversation was abruptly interrupted by a massive explosion that illuminated the entire horizon. Sound arrived seconds later. Julius observed energy spreading across the sky and smiled uncomfortably. It was quite Dragarian-like in its approach, but he hadn't expected something so drastic so quickly. His father had the tendency to find solutions that were simultaneously good and completely disproportionate. "What was that?" Luna asked, helping Rin carefully place Larissa in a more comfortable position. "He probably destroyed the bridge, considering the direction," Julius responded, trying to sound more casual than he felt. "The bridge," Leora repeated, not sure she had heard correctly. The concept was difficult to process, destroying something that had existed for generations, that defined a relationship between kingdoms, now completely broken and isolated. "My father has the habit of seeking simple solutions to complex problems," Julius explained while they began walking toward the castle. If he saw many enemy soldiers entering, he surely thought of the most direct way to stop the war. Despite his father having proven even more hasty than Julius had remembered, breaking the bridge meant a significant pause in the conflict. Xiao, facing such a situation, would have to retreat completely and seek alternative solutions, or even consider abandoning the conflict entirely. They had no choice. With their main invasion route destroyed, continuing the war had become logistically impossible for the moment. "So, did we win?" Leora asked with a bit of hope. Julius considered the question while observing the last flashes of energy vanish on the horizon. "For now, it's yet to be seen," he finally responded. "But knowing my father, it probably means only the beginning." Cashin and Ravenspire had arrived shortly before the bridge explosion at the academy, where very few students remained attending their summer extra classes. The place was almost empty, with only some dedicated few who had decided to take advantage of the additional week to improve their skills while others enjoyed vacations. And of course, some hadn't been able to return home for various less upright reasons. Ravenspire still felt uneasy with Dragarian's arrival at the battlefield. That madman was still something from another level completely. His mana aura remained concerning to him even after so many increases from his 4 abyssal beasts. The memory of their previous encounter was fresh and humbling, being casually swatted aside like an irritating insect by someone. Maybe if Xiao's strongest warriors all fought at once. Ravenspire still didn't know the total scope of the power from the new potions Venmont and Bloodwind had received, but didn't have too many hopes after experiencing Dragarian's power head-on again, being launched like a rag doll, and the pain was still fresh on his face. Still, he certainly wasn't invincible. With the level they had now, after transformations, Maybe the 3 or 4 best warriors would be sufficient to face him. But were they willing to risk everything in such an uncertain battle? At least he wasn't. Cashin pulled him from his thoughts, still annoyed by the earlier encounter. "That damn brat must have used some clever trick again," he murmured, unconsciously touching where Ren's punch had connected. Although it didn't hurt physically, his ego on the other hand. There's no way an 11-year-old. He abruptly changed the subject when Ravenspire looked at him with what was clearly pity at seeing him make more excuses. "I sense what little remains of my blood in the direction of the student building," Cashin announced, pointing toward where his senses detected Klein's familiar presence. Ravenspire followed his gaze toward the student dormitories. "Aren't you worried that Monster will follow us here?" he asked. "Wasting time here after what happened to take a simple child." "Don't worry," Cashin reassured him with confidence. "My perception is very sensitive when the threads aren't connected. He surely won't follow us, because things at the bridge are completely out of control." Ravenspire remained skeptical, but concentrated and began sensing Venmont's massive power, even from here, now that they had gotten closer to the bridge area. Now he had to agree with young Cashin. The energy level being released, there was sufficient to keep even that king occupied. "Maybe I underestimated the next phase of our king's plan," he murmured, reconsidering his previous evaluations. "With that power distributed among 3 tamers like us, would it be a safe battle against Dragarian?" The mathematics were becoming more favorable, but that crazy old man still carried risks that made strategic withdrawal seem increasingly attractive. Cashin pulled him from his thoughts again, clearly anxious to proceed with his plan. "Klein will serve me well now that Karzan broke," he explained with a disconnected and cunning expression. "And although he's not very remarkable, my pathetic brother—" He paused, considering possibilities. "I can surely mold him into a better figure now that I have one free space to work with. If I shape Klein or Lionel well, one of them can drag that Luna girl toward her inevitable destiny later." Ravenspire nodded, seeing the logic of securing more long-term options, but remained worried about more immediate matters. "But if we can't contain Dragarian," he murmured, "future plans for the gates can go down the abyss along with everything else." Klein was sheltered along with others in the Academy's refuge. Han stayed close, along with the 6 guard girls who had developed a monitoring routine around the area where Klein studied. Academic staff auxiliaries helped organize supplies while other teachers and personnel remained vigilant, all waiting for news about the war's development. Classes had been definitively canceled due to the growing problem, and students had hidden along with staff, hoping good news would arrive about the conflict that had been escalating. Normal academic life had ended for the foreseeable future. Although Klein didn't interact directly with Han and the guard girls, they did maintain constant observation of him. It was subtle but constant surveillance of the son and younger brother of characters they knew were problematic in the war conflict. Everything remained in the same tense routine. Klein had focused on improving his skills with intensity that bordered on sickness, taking advantage of every available moment to train and study. Han continued sending harmless intelligence reports to Yino, information he believed was low value. Although today he would realize it hadn't been as unimportant as he believed. The situation of Klein being constantly monitored would have been crucial information for Yino planning to take him. Or that's what Han would think in the end, when he realized the implications of his apparently insignificant reports in today's events. But in reality, Klein would be dragged by his brother for reasons completely unrelated to Han's reports. Information about purification, maintaining itself for a long time without exposure to abyssal energy, was, in itself, something completely expected. The irony was bitter. Careful intelligence gathering rendered meaningless by family bonds that operated according to principles beyond planning. Among teachers who had stayed to deal with students during the crisis were Teacher May and almost only young auxiliaries who tried to improve their curriculum with great enthusiasm. Lastly, as every year, some few veteran professors who literally dedicated their lives to the school also remained, refusing to abandon students regardless of danger. One of them was the temporary auxiliary teacher who had covered Xiao in late Song's place in classes that had been left uncovered. He was an enthusiastic young man with a stealth owl, somewhat weaker than Xiao's mist owl, but compensated an aura with pure dedication. He wasn't the one who felt the air's disturbance first, since Han had enhanced abyssal senses. But he was the first to raise his voice when everyone perceived it. "Do you feel that?" he murmured, his owl moving with evident agitation. The bird's distress was infectious. Han immediately went on alert. The guard girls instinctively positioned themselves together in defensive formation. Everyone was tense except Klein, who had been too absorbed in his studies to notice the initial change in atmosphere. It was then that the refuge door shattered. Cassian entered first, his presence immediately recognizable, but transformed by something that made the air itself feel heavier. Behind him came Ravenspire, and it was his aura that made everyone in the room feel deep terror they couldn't explain. "Hello, Klein," Cassian said casually, as if he had arrived for a normal social visit. Chapter 462, Tamer's War, Broken Threads. Klein looked up from his books, and immediately his expression hardened with the accumulated resentment. "What are you doing here?" he asked, his voice letting out months of repressed frustration. "I've come to take you to the new home where you will belong," Cassian responded, slowly advancing toward the room's center. The small number of teachers and guards tensed, being silver or lower. Since all school gold ranks participated in the war, no one dared move. There was something in the two visitors' presence that promised instant violence to anyone who interfered. "I don't want to go with you," Klein declared, remaining seated but with his jaw clenched. "I'm sick of your lies and how you hog all of Father's attention." He didn't say it all directly, but also the resentment for years of being deceived and manipulated hadn't been forgiven and was evident in every word. The accumulated grievances of someone who had been lied to, exploited, and systematically undermined by the person who should have protected him. The auxiliary teacher, seeing tension escalating and instinctively recognizing Klein was in danger, stepped forward. "Excuse me," he said with all the authority he could muster, "but students are under academic protection during this crisis. You can't simply—" He didn't finish the sentence. Ravenspire moved with speed that defied perception, and the young teacher simply stopped breathing. His neck so brutally destroyed that the echo of his pain was felt throughout the entire refuge. The silence that followed was absolute. "Does anyone else have academic objections?" Ravenspire asked with courtesy that made his violence even more terrifying. No one responded. The guard girls visibly trembled. Han had completely paled, and remaining teachers had become statues of pure terror. Klein slowly stood, processing what he had just witnessed. "Did you just kill someone?" he whispered, incredulity mixing with horror. "Yes," Ravenspire responded as he bowed. "Does it bother you?" Cassian sighed with exasperation. "You didn't have to do that so dramatically," he told Ravenspire. Now, Klein is going to be more resistant. He addressed his younger brother with patience that sounded practiced. "Klein, you need to come with me. It's for your own good." The tone was reasonable and caring, the voice of someone explaining necessary medicine to a sick child. False concern. "No," Klein shouted. "I'm not going anywhere with you. I'm sick of you." Cassian moved closer, his movements deliberate and threatening. "Klein, don't make me do this the hard way. Go to hell," Klein roared, fusing with his beast in a desperate gesture of defiance. He had recently leveled up to Bronze 2, and his defiant roar resonated throughout the refuge. But neither his improved strength nor his new abilities were rivals for Cassian. The power disparity was cruel and absolute, enough improvement to give Klein hope, not enough to give him actual chance against someone some levels higher. Cassian hit him. It wasn't a soft, reprimanding blow. It was a frustration-filled punch from an older brother who had lost patience, connecting with Klein's face with enough force to send him to the ground. The violence was personal and brutal, family dynamics expressing themselves through raw physical force. Klein got up bleeding from his nose, his eyes shining with tears of pain and betrayal. "Why?" he murmured, touching his injured face. The question carried weight beyond the immediate moment. Not just why the punch, but why everything, why the lies, why the manipulation, why the sudden change of everything he had believed about his family. "Because you leave me no choice," Cashin responded, beginning to manifest something that made the air around him become visible with strange patterns. Ravenspire, who had been observing the familiar scene with amusement, approached Cashin with a smile that tried to hide his worry, even if the family drama promised entertainment. "We're on the dangerous idiot's side. Remember?" he interrupted. "This is taking too much time." "Cashin, hurry up." "I'm on it," Cashin murmured, concentrating on something that required absolute precision. Invisible threads began extending from his hands, seeking connection points in Klein's nervous system. "I didn't want to do this by force," Cashin explained while working, "because it's more painful for both of us in the neural connection. But you leave me no choice." The other children, Han, and guards could do nothing. Despite having developed some empathy for the poor boy from the wrong family, Ravenspire's terror kept them completely paralyzed. "You'll be the best version of yourself," Cashin insisted while threads sought to approach Klein's head and neural connections. "I'll help you achieve your true objectives, like I did with Father." Klein retreated desperately, but didn't fully understand what his brother meant. "I'm sick of your lies," he shouted. "Stop talking like you own him. I'm going to get Father's approval on my own. I won't need to listen to you ever again." Ravenspire laughed with genuine delight. "Oh, this is on another level," he commented. "I didn't know this part of you, Cashin. You're truly ruthless." He decided that Venmont was going strong, and they had time to add his own entertainment to the situation. "You know what, little Klein?" Ravenspire said, approaching the crawling child. "Let me show you something interesting." He created an illusion so real Klein couldn't distinguish it from reality. His father appeared, but with a crucial difference. Karzan's eyes were empty, controlled, and when he spoke, it was with Cashin's voice. "I haven't existed for years," Karzan's illusion declared. "Your father was always Cashin. Every decision, every word, every moment of approval or disapproval, everything was him." Klein didn't want to believe it, but when he examined his memories more carefully, he realized something horrible. Memories of a distant and cruel father coincided exactly with periods when Cashin had begun being strange and distant too. Shortly after his father's announcement of allying with the Starweavers to protect the gates, leaving behind rivalry, that alliance announcement that never was. A younger Cashin had murmured defeat and disappointment. The timeline was perfect, every moment of paternal cruelty corresponding to periods of Cashin's emotional distance, every family disappointment tracing back to his brother's manipulation. "No," Klein whispered, his resistance weakening while processing implications. Ravenspire abruptly cut the illusion and showed something even worse. Karzan's severed head appeared in his hands, lifeless eyes confirming reality Klein had been denying. "This hasn't been your real father for years. You've been seeing a puppet," Ravenspire explained casually. "What's left of him, anyway?" Klein screamed, a sound that combined pain, horror, and absolute loss. The cry was primal and heartbreaking. Cashin immediately scolded the crow. "That wasn't necessary," he snapped. "Now the connection will be more difficult for me. You're going to make me feel my idiot brother's stress with more intensity." The complaint was purely practical, annoyance at having his work made more difficult rather than concern for Klein's psychological state. Ravenspire shrugged and apologized with false repentance. "Sorry for playing along. I thought it would be fun. I wasn't wrong, though." Cashin sighed deeply and addressed Klein, who was now sobbing on the floor. "I'm going to revive our true father. Father is going to be just like before that stupid announcement," he promised with gentleness. "Everything he was is in my head, and I can repair it. I'll even make it better than before." Klein looked up, tears and blood mixing on his face. "That's not my father," he screamed with absolute desperation. "It's just your stupid idea. How can you be so idiotic not to see it?" His voice broke while asking what he most feared to know. "Did you kill him?" Chapter 463, Tamer's War, Broken Threads, Price of Freedom. Cashin was about to respond when Ravenspire intervened impatiently. "Time, Cashin. We don't have all day. Another reminder of not-so-distant battles that could reshape kingdoms while they wasted precious moments on family drama. Cashin sighed again and looked at his younger brother with what might have been pity. "It's for your own good," he declared. "So, if you don't want to suffer more than necessary, I recommend you stop resisting." He attempted to subdue Klein completely, forcing neural threads toward connections that would allow total control. The violation was not just physical assault, but fundamental erasure of everything that made Klein himself, reducing him to extension of Cashin's will. But in the end, after Klein resisted with every fiber of his being, screaming until his voice broke, something unexpected happened. Cashin's threads inside his head failed to connect. For some reason neither of them completely understood, Klein was immune. Cashin's threads couldn't activate. Klein collapsed, exhausted but free, while Cashin looked at him with great confusion. The contradiction was maddening. Power that had worked on their father, that had subjugated one of the kingdom's most powerful tamers, failing against a bronze-rank child. "Interesting," Ravenspire murmured, observing the unexpected development with curiosity. Cashin straightened, frustration evident while processing the failure. "Well," he finally said with growing disinterest, "I suppose I don't need you after all." Klein had ceased being the prospect of a useful tool. Without capacity for direct control, he was simply the uncooperative disappointment he had always been. Taking him no longer had value if he couldn't control him. But Ravenspire thought differently. His eyes gleamed while observing the child who had accomplished something that should have been impossible. "Wait," he murmured, approaching Klein with renewed interest. "I want to try something else." He prepared to take him to experiment with illusions, wondering if Klein's immunity extended to other forms of mental manipulation. It was then that Hans stepped forward. With deliberate movements, he raised both hands and closed his eyes, beginning to recite in low voice a code that only high-level operatives knew. Raven 6 Alpha Black Deep Root. The intervention was desperate. Identification that might mean survival or might mean immediate execution, depending on Ravenspire's mood. Ravenspire narrowed his eyes dangerously, his claws beginning to extend, but Han released a small amount of abyssal energy. Trace amounts, barely perceptible, but sufficient to confirm real affiliation. He continued in coded cipher, explaining he had been documenting Klein's behavior for months, claiming that maintaining the subject in natural state was crucial for understanding long-term affectations. Forced intervention would compromise valuable data. The explanation was professional and plausible intelligence gathering that prioritized long-term value. Yet Ravenspire didn't understand why this operative would risk himself for an apparently minor objective, but luckily he didn't have time to analyze the situation completely. The world shook. The bridge exploded. The explosion sent shock waves that were felt even at this distance. The building trembled, windows vibrated, and for a moment the air itself seemed to crystallize with residual energy. Venmont's dominant aura, which had been constantly pulsing on the horizon, abruptly vanished. The sudden absence was more disturbing than the explosion. Ravenspire felt an immediate stab of alarm. He was about to tell Cashin he would take Klein by force when an unexpected voice cut through the tension. "Ah! Oh, this is magnificent!" Everyone turned toward the sound. In the shelter's corner, an accountant apparently avoided among staff refugees swayed dramatically in his chair on a lone table, gesticulating wildly while a small mouse jumped in the middle of the same table. The display was bizarre, like madness expressing itself through theatrical performance that somehow felt more honest than normal behavior. "Do you see the cosmic irony?" the accountant exclaimed, his eyes shining with a mixture of terror and hysteria. "Here is our young hero, valiantly fighting for his freedom." He jumped up with movement that shifted the table, almost knocking over the mouse, which squeaked indignantly. "But what is freedom but the most expensive illusion we ever buy? A premium cage with golden bars we call choice." He made an elaborate bow while trapping the mouse in a crystal basin, the mouse running in circles inside the cage. At least in slavery, one knows exactly what the rules are. But in freedom, in freedom, one becomes slave to every decision, every possibility, every path not taken. His laughter became sharper, more desperate. It's the universe's ultimate joke. We fight to escape a small cage only to discover we've run toward an infinitely larger cage. The mouse, apparently accustomed to these dramatic monologues, lay down quietly and began moving its paws erratically. And most beautiful, the accountant continued, tears of laughter mixing with terror, is that we pay all our money, all our time, all our sanity for the privilege of this superior cage. Ravenspire watched the weird spectacle with genuine fascination, to the point of not thinking about killing the impertinent man. There was something artistic and refined that pleased him, that elaborate aura he himself sought to emit. The joke, born from terror and apparent psychological breakdown, had touched something in Ravenspire's mind that seemed profoundly true. Freedom as commodity, independence as the most expensive form of dependence. More importantly, it had given him a brilliant idea. "You know what?" Ravenspire murmured, a ravening smile spreading across his face. "You're right. Let's see if our foolish little boy can really maintain his precious freedom and newly found purity for long." He withdrew a small potion from his tunic, purple liquid that pulsed with promises of easy power. "Take this," he ordered Klein, who was still on the ground, exhausted. "No," Klein responded weakly. It wasn't a request. Ravenspire forced the potion down Klein's throat, holding him immobile while the corrupting liquid let gravity do its work. Han remained standing with hands raised. Ravenspire struck him casually, sending him staggering. But he forgave him due to his proven usefulness so far. Then he disappeared and addressed the accountant from behind, who was still laughing hysterically. "And you, philosopher," he said, placing a claw on the man's neck, "you're also going to perform longer for me." He put another potion on the table for the accountant, who looked at it with confused eyes until the claw cut his skin a bit. "Of course," the accountant exclaimed, raising the potion like a toast. "The final corruption, the ultimate price of membership in the crystallized Freedom Club." He drank the potion in one gulp, his mouse squeaking worriedly from the crystal enclosure. "Now I am truly free to be slave to your forces." Ravenspire observed the reactions for a moment, memorizing every detail for future analysis. Then his shadow divided some small parts that entered the experiment shadows. "Perfect," he murmured. "We'll see gradually if the immunity is real or simply temporary." He vanished again and materialized from shadows next to Cashin, who had been observing everything with distant expression. "It's time to return. We'll take the long route. Dragarian clearly has no rival here anymore, and if he decides to pursue us..." He didn't need to finish the sentence. Both disappeared, leaving the refuge in disturbing silence. Klein remained on the ground, feeling something strange beginning to circulate through his system, while Han painfully got up. The accountant had broken the glass basin with his head, his mouse whispering in his ear as if calming him. And Klein, unknowingly, was about to discover exactly how deep his newly found immunity ran. Chapter 464, Tamer's War, Victory's Illusion. Ignatius was with one of the bombardment squadrons that had done exemplary work during the conflict's early stages. Their power was impressive. Basically, 60% of all Yano's gold-rank fire and wind tamers were distributed among these specialized squadrons. Although there were fewer than 100 gold ranks, and most of the more than 5,000 bombardment squadron participants in this defense war were Silver 3, the coordination with them had been masterful. Ignatius had the honor of personally knowing the vast majority of the strongest, having seen at least a third during their years at the academy. Many of them were names that would appear in history books, masters whose techniques were studied in advanced courses, and perhaps, without knowing it, today they had contributed new details that Ignatius would add to the curricula. His academy had to maintain itself above the schools of the dusty hag and the wet jester. The bridge bombardment had been constant and had perfectly stopped the enemy advance until Venmont's false dragon's unfortunate appearance. Everything had changed there. Many frontline soldiers had been eliminated in minutes, forcing everyone to retreat in what quickly became a chaotic withdrawal. After losing organization due to terror inspired by Venmont's deadly storms and poison attacks, Maximilian's consequent lashing with his aerial troops had mercilessly devastated retreating forces. The casualties had been devastating. But when the situation had dramatically reversed and history's most powerful king had destroyed the bridge in a single epic movement, Maximilian and his troops had fled at a speed that only their maximum cowardice could provide. The 3,000 Yino soldiers who were now trapped on this side of the abyss, without a bridge to return, raised their hands in surrender before the gaze of Yano's army, reorganizing after the disastrous and disorderly retreat. The difficult thing for everyone was containing the thirst for immediate revenge. Fury over those fallen in Venmont's attack and Maximilian's humiliating pursuit boiled in every surviving soldier. The poor, trapped, silver-rank bastards, ex-Yino frontline, knew perfectly they had no chance now that they couldn't escape back, and the rage of those returning after the dishonorable retreat was about to explode in uncontrolled violence. Soldiers who had watched friends die, who had been forced to flee in terror, now faced the opportunity for payback against almost helpless enemies. So it exploded. The first attacks began from the rear. Fire spears, wind projectiles, techniques seeking immediate revenge. But what seemed would end in a massacre was stopped by the king himself. Dragarian descended from the sky like a brilliant and just judge, positioning himself directly over the trapped soldiers. With movements that seemed casual, he deflected all vengeful attacks toward the abyss, where they dispersed harmlessly in darkness. The vengeful force that had begun launching stopped instantly. Everyone fell into absolute silence, off filling their hearts, seeing the powerful sovereign in direct action. The 3,000 prisoners looked into the distance, to the other side of the destroyed bridge, where Yino troops retreated and disappeared in the distance like fleeing from a natural disaster. They didn't want to look at the powerful sovereign who was about to decide their fate, but they no longer had any other option. Watching their allies disappear made them clearly understand their destiny. For the moment, battle had completely stopped, and they had been left alone, abandoned by their own allied forces, the forces for whom they had risked their lives, trying to open a way to let them cross the bridge. Was it worth it? They asked themselves. It began with a single soldier. Perhaps he was frustrated by betrayal, too frightened, or too impressed to remember which kingdom he nominally served. He knelt on rocky ground, then lowered his head until touching earth in complete submission. Little by little, like a silent wave, all soldiers did the same. It was an image that would be engraved in every witness's memory. 3,000 silver warriors, paying homage to power that transcended political loyalties. Dragarian was there, floating over a small army, asking mercy before what was basically an unstoppable natural force for them. The power difference was so absolute that resisting would have been like a toothless baby trying to bite an adult to death. Yano's king's mana density was 2 levels above them. They had no way to harm him. Different levels of existence. The king observed them in silence for a moment, evaluating the situation. "They'll take you to temporary enclosure in the mines," he finally declared, his voice amplified to reach all present soldiers. But then his tone changed, charging with mana that made their ears vibrate with the demonstration of absolute authority. He carefully hid his real fatigue. The aura he projected admitted no disobedience. At the first act of defiance, he continued, each word resonating like the final sentence. "I eliminate you." It wasn't a threat. It was a declaration of just and logical reality. The 3,000 prisoners remained prostrate, perfectly understanding their survival depended entirely on mercy from someone who could erase them from existence with a casual movement. Ignatius observed everything from his position with the bombardiers, processing that he had just witnessed not only a battle's end, but a historic event and the clearest possible demonstration of why Dragarian was considered a living legend. The war had stopped not because resources had been exhausted or because diplomacy had triumphed. It had ended because one person had decided it was enough, and everyone present, enemies and allies alike, had to accept that reality without question. Arturo met with Dragarian while he let the army take prisoners toward the mines, then headed toward the castle with tired bodies that tried to seem casual. Arturo's feelings were completely conflicted. On one hand, he felt overwhelming relief that his father had arrived to save them just when everything seemed lost. Without his intervention, the kingdom would have fallen and everyone would have died, or worse. On the other hand, he was deeply annoyed because it had taken years for him to return from his mysterious mission. Had he not left, things surely wouldn't have gotten so out of control. The problems with Xiao, escalating tensions, the war itself. Everything could have been avoided with his presence. The frustration was legitimate and deep. Years of managing crises that could have been prevented, of making decisions that should have been his father's responsibility, of carrying weight that wasn't meant for his shoulders yet. Arturo was about to reproach him for exactly that when he looked more carefully at his father's posture and expression. Dragarian was tired to a level that bordered on collapse. He hid it extraordinarily well, maintaining that casual and controlled facade he always projected, but Arturo wasn't just any silver warrior. He was a high double gold with experience. The signs were subtle but unmistakable to someone who understood the cost of wielding power at such scales, micro-tremors in hands that should have been steady, breath patterns that would show exhaustion if not masked with discipline. "I'll take you to rest at the castle," Arturo declared, immediately forgetting his reproaches upon recognizing the man had likely worked himself to death. "Things aren't completely controlled," Dragarian responded, shaking his head. "I can't sleep yet. I must maintain my elevated mana signature, or the powers waiting in Xiao's center and our Xiao's depths might realize and come for us." Arturo tried to understand, concern evident in his expression. "There are two signatures with power very similar to Venmont's," Dragarian explained, his eyes directing toward the horizon where Xiao continued existing. "One even slightly superior. If I have to fight them in this state, I'll die. I don't have enough energy." Chapter 465, Tamer's War, The Cost of Victory. "I need to appear whole so they don't come. Let's hope they don't feel like testing their luck until I really recover." It seems I wasn't the only one trying to get stronger. Arturo immediately understood the implications and decided to take him to the castle where Victor was being attended by the best available healers. "I don't need healing," Dragarian protested while they flew. "I'm not sick or injured, just fatigue from the long journey. Nothing that some rest, drink, and good food can't fix." The protest was casual but telling. Someone accustomed to solving problems through overwhelming force now reduced to hoping rest and nutrition would be sufficient to face the challenges ahead. But when they arrived in a few minutes and were ready to enter, Victor waited at the castle's main entrance, clearly having sensed the moment of their arrival in the mana they emanated. There the eldest son did reproach him for everything Arturo had decided to keep to himself. Victor was more extroverted by nature, and besides, his ego was quite wounded by things that had happened to him during battle. Having been defeated so soundly by Venmont had been humiliating for someone accustomed to dominating the skies. "What you don't understand with that hard head, damn old fool," Victor continued without holding back anything, "is that your absence almost cost us the entire kingdom. Why the hell didn't you return when I asked you directly a year ago? You've been playing Explorer for years while we—" Dragarian laughed, interrupting the diatribe with genuine amusement. "You're right," he admitted without defensiveness. "My departure took much longer than expected because those dragons are incredibly stubborn. I thought it would be a matter of months, not years." The casual admission was both refreshing and infuriating, acknowledgement of fault delivered with the same energy most people use to discuss what to eat rather than matters of life and death. He addressed Victor with an expression that became more serious. "But we have no choice. If I don't get all the rings, it won't be possible to destroy whatever the crystal wants behind those gates, or the crystal itself. Its density is above diamond. Without the tin and synergy, I don't think we can stop it. Before leaving, I couldn't even scratch it." His sons exchanged glances, not completely understanding what he had just said. Dragarian noticed their confusion, but didn't seem inclined to elaborate at that moment. Instead, he headed toward the castle's interior with that characteristic casualness he used to avoid overly serious conversations. "I'm going to look for some medicines the old woman kept in our vaults," he announced over his shoulder. "Those that make you stay standing longer than you should." Victor and Arturo followed him, both processing that their father apparently had plans requiring being awake and functional far beyond what his current state allowed. "Don't worry, I know what I'm doing." But his words didn't reassure either of his sons, who realized the war that had just ended might have been only the first act of something much larger. The victory they had celebrated moments before suddenly felt much more fragile than it had seemed. Ren arrived with others at the castle shortly after the king and his two sons entered through the main gates. His third son, now missing an arm, had just arrived as well. Julius had carried most of the wounded on his Earth Wolverine's back, but especially Xiao, whose condition had deteriorated slightly more during the journey. Ren carried Larissa in his arms, still unconscious from extreme magical exhaustion. Sirius carefully transported Selphra, while Luna and Leora simply ensured everyone stayed well during the journey. The arrival of the third prince and princess completed the main queen's family at the castle, a reunion that should have been celebratory but was overshadowed by wounds and general exhaustion. Ren couldn't stop thinking about what he had witnessed during battle. He had seen Ravenspire eliminate the Golden Spore's energy with his shadow wings, transforming purification into corruption. A significant part of Karzan's army had been controlled and infected by that abyssal energy. The king's arrival and blow to the crow's face had immediately canceled the mass's mental control, but hadn't fixed the fundamental problem of corruption now infecting thousands of soldiers. The army Julius had formed was still stationed in defensive positions, while Karzan's army gradually dispersed. The section that had seen Ren closer and been purified before Ravenspire's arrival hadn't been affected by the crow. Many of them had changed their mentality and returned peacefully to their homes. But many other soldiers, about 8,000 total, were still confused about what to do and fearful to move on both sides of the ice wall Selphra had created. They also feared retaliation from the section of soldiers Julius had left in charge of keeping them watched and not allowing their advance toward the castle. That surveillance force now had slightly superior numbers, reaching almost 10,000 effectives, and was managed by Abyssal Wall veterans who not only knew how to handle corrupt beasts. Ren thought intensely about how purification of so many people at once might be possible. He couldn't simply launch light rays at everyone. His absorption network had worked well on the battlefield full of spores, but 8,000 corrupted people would require something much more controlled than an extensive and painful new infection. Luna realized he was worried about something beyond normal battle fatigue and thought about approaching to say something, but Julia spoke first and made her retreat with embarrassment, though the topic had nothing to do with her. "Invite them in," he told guards at the entrance. "Put the wounded in the best prepared rooms, and give them something to recover and rest too." Julius made a signal, and several maids immediately approached Ren. "May we take the princess?" one of them asked politely, extending arms toward Larissa. Ren knew she only needed rest. Despite having forced her magical connections beyond her limits, Ren had already made a small adjustment to her energy flow while carrying her during the short journey. Her mana channels were gradually stabilizing thanks to that. "It's fine," Ren nodded, carefully transferring Larissa to the maid's arms. "She just needs sleep." Julius sent Sirius with Selphra to restrooms as well. They also just need rest, Ren thought, observing how they took away the ancient warrior. Especially Selphra. She should be waking up after recovering from the fusion, just like what happened with Lynn. Lynn should be waking very soon at Leora and Selphra's home, where her parents and neighbors would still be worried. But when Julius began heading toward where they had put Xiao, Ren worried again about the present. "What are you going to do with the professor?" he asked. "Take him to doctors for medicine against mana excess," Julius responded, as if it were the most obvious solution. "That will kill him," Ren scolded harshly, surprising Julius with his reaction's intensity. The outburst was sharp and alarming, not just disagreement, but genuine terror at watching someone prescribe poison as medicine. Julius immediately worried, seeing Ren's expression. "Why? What's wrong with standard medicine?" he asked while holding his stump. "Xiao doesn't just have normal mana excess," Ren explained quickly. "He also has poisoning from excess anti-mana medicine. His body is already too saturated with those substances. Giving him more would be like poisoning someone already dying from poison." Julius processed the information and immediately decided to change plans. "Then I'll take him to the experts first," he declared, gesturing for Ren to follow him. "You come with me. You clearly seem to understand his condition." Luna and Leora, moved by natural curiosity and concern for the professor who had taught and protected them, decided to follow them too. "How did you know that about Xiao?" Leora asked while they walked through castle corridors. "You can see it in his symptoms," he responded. "The way his mana lines are damaged, his skin color, his flow pattern. Everything indicates toxic saturation and prolonged exposure to high mana levels." "And do you know how to cure him?" Luna asked hopefully. "Maybe," Ren responded, internally already consulting with Machido about real possibilities of purifying so much accumulated damage. Chapter 466, Tamer's War, Medical Experts. Moving through the castle corridors, Ren gradually realized the structure was truly enormous, much more than he had anticipated from the already imposing exterior. A bunch of people with different tasks seemed to live here permanently. There were cooks running with trays, cleaners maintaining tapestries, scribes carrying documents, guard patrolling in rotations, and dozens of other workers whose specific functions Ren couldn't identify. Most looked busy and hurried, though he didn't know if this was normal or if the current frenzy was because of the war. The scale was impressive, a self-contained city within the castle walls. Hundreds of people whose lives revolve around maintaining and supporting the royal family and their operations. After considerable time moving through different corridors and stairs, many more than Ren first expected, they finally arrived where Julius wanted to take them. It was a castle section clearly dedicated to medical functions, with specialized rooms and the distinctive smell of medicinal herbs and healing potions. There were the experts Julius had mentioned. The first was an older man with a parasitic Venus, a disturbing-looking beast that resembled a carnivorous plant, but with tentacles that looked like hair all over its body and moved constantly. It was an evolutionary variant of Hannah's Venus antenna, one of Larissa's guards. The creature was silver rank and had detection abilities that could analyze internal body conditions with micrometric precision. The second expert had a leech bee, equally silver rank, whose appearance was a somewhat disturbing amalgamation between insect and lamprey. It was significantly larger than a 3-year-old child, with a pulsing abdomen and long, hairy antennae with enormous sensory capacity. Ren immediately realized both beasts were tremendously useful for medical diagnosis. They were specialized directly or indirectly in detecting exactly what was happening in patients at the cellular level. The combination of their abilities would provide comprehensive understanding of even the most complex medical conditions. The expert with the leech bee reacted quickly when he saw Julius approaching with Xiao. He fused with his beast and breathed deeply, sniffing the patient even before Julius explained the situation. But his facial expression wasn't very optimistic. He looked at the other expert, and the first invited him with a silent hand gesture, clearly communicating through years of working together. "He's an important soldier," Julius began explaining, worried by the not-so-subtle expert's expression while they carefully placed Xiao on the examination bed. "Taito Xiao isn't the leader of an important house or a gold-rank royal guard, but he's one of the most effective and efficient operatives I have in my service." Julius moved nervously while speaking, clearly worried about someone he valued enormously. He had even forgotten to have his usual consideration of not calling him by his name. Xiao didn't love the sound of it and felt it ruined the image he wanted to project. He's taken missions above his rank, and whenever stealth or tracking has been necessary in a mission, Xiao has been excellent, often surpassing my brother Victor's gold rank assets. He stopped for a moment, holding his head. "I've always trusted him for many important missions. If Xiao were gold rank like the almost 500 we have in all of Yano, I have no doubt he'd be among the best 5 soldiers, if not the best. He looked toward Run with evident gratitude. With the gift Rin gave him, he'll be even more important for our operations. Under no circumstances can you let him die. The expert with the parasitic Venus, gently pushed by his colleague, began the detailed examination. He sent his beast's small roots toward Xiao, and these entered his body through skin pores. Little by little, the roots expanded through Xiao's circulatory system, like a biological sensor system exploring every part of his internal anatomy. The expert's face became progressively grimmer while processing information his beast's roots transmitted. His mana system is too damaged, he began explaining, his voice carrying the certainty of decades of medical experience. Almost his entire mana processing center is destroyed in thousands of small microscopic wounds. He paused, clearly struggling to find a way to explain the situation's gravity. It's a miracle they brought him alive from wherever there was such an extreme mana level. Most people would have died from shock long before developing this type of systemic damage. But can he be cured? Julius asked anxiously. The expert slowly shook his head. I'm truly sorry since you seem very fond of the soldier. This will only continue deteriorating. Healing will be extremely difficult, practically impossible, because closing those microscopic wounds throughout his system would be weeks of work for a group of expert healers, weeks that his body wouldn't withstand. He pointed toward different parts of Xiao's body while explaining. Mana keeps escaping from his system constantly and is crystallizing in his body around his entire B circulation system. It's like he has thousands of small magical glass fragments. He paused and shook his head. It's very regrettable because I realize he's a double with still unrealized potential, he murmured. But we can do almost nothing with conventional methods. Why not? Leora asked, though her voice suggested she feared the answer. The second expert, whose Leechbee had been analyzing toxins in Xiao's system, added his own grim diagnosis. To begin with, anti-mana medicine won't work because his system is already extremely intoxicated with it, he explained. His body can't process more toxins without collapsing completely. The second expert elaborated with technical details that made Julius pale. The worst part is that anti-mana medicine forms small pockets around the small crystallizations and stuck to them, being unable to be processed correctly, nor being sufficient to disarm crystals that were no longer in their pure, original form. Original form? Julius asked. Environmental mana is believed to exist in a state between light and gas, the expert responded. When mana crystallizes naturally, it loses its semi-ethereal properties that allow it to be gradually reabsorbed by our mana veins, which are more like pathways and arrangements that reflect our beast's integration into our system. But once pure mana solidifies, we need to process it again and inside the body that's without medicine for excess. We're at a crossroads. In summary, medicine is the only solution to crystals in his body, but at this point, it will only make things worse, the first expert concluded. Julius looked devastated. So, there's nothing that can be done? The two experts exchanged glances that confirmed the terminal prognosis. Not even with the most modern methods, no, they admitted. We're sorry. It was then that Ren stepped forward, finishing processing how to explain his solution while absorbing the information and medical jargon he had been taking in. Chapter 467, Tamer's War, Unorthodox Medical Progress. Have you considered using beast materials to absorb those crystals from his processing system? Ren asked. The experts looked at him with curiosity, but much more skepticism. The question was unexpected, coming from a child who should have been overwhelmed by the technical jargon they had just delivered, yet spoke with confidence that suggested a weird, genuine understanding. What type of materials can do something like that? The first expert asked, his tone carrying the patient indulgence of a professional humoring a child's question. Tentacles from beasts with absorption capacity. Ren began, naming a material that made both experts raise their eyebrows. To dissolve solidified crystallizations. Beasts with that capacity break down crystallized mana back to its semi-ethereal state. Like the ones from those nocturnal pests? the second expert asked, his voice high with immediate rejection. Those are terrible things for a sick person. They would steal the little vitality energy he has left faster, not just mana. We would never use such harmful materials. Those things would be at the level of trepanation and bloodletting, things that have been left far in the past. The comparison was apt and disturbing. Ancient medical practices that had killed more patients than they saved, abandoned for good reason by civilized medicine. It's different, Ren insisted, his voice carrying conviction that made the experts pause. And that's why we'll need to powder a high-vitality beast. Liquid extract wouldn't work because it doesn't block the short vitality absorption fibers well. We only need the long fibers being free. Those are the ones that absorb only mana. Beast powder? Julius asked, reducing living creatures to dust, harvesting their essence for therapeutic purposes that sounded more like alchemy than medicine. Beasts with very high vitality usually have much more of that than mana. So when preyed upon by absorption beasts and left without mana, they dry up completely, and the remaining powder from their bodies returns to the soil, Ren explained with matter-of-fact clarity. I left some at school and carry some materials in my backpack, but they won't be enough if you can get me some. The experts looked at each other. That was clearly outside their area of expertise. Years of conventional medical training hadn't prepared them for therapeutic approaches that sounded more like battlefield scavenging than clinical practice. And assuming crystals could be extracted, what would we do for microscopic wounds and medicine pockets? The first expert asked, skeptical of such a small child solving the complex problem, but genuinely intrigued by where this conversation was going. Regenerative gel from any transparent amphibian. Being of water element, it has healing properties and is also the most biocompatible, Ren responded without hesitation. If we can get it from the tissues surrounding its core, it wouldn't heal wounds directly, but would create a temporary matrix around his mana veins that would allow the mana system to repair itself gradually. It's like giving scaffolding to the natural healing process. The metaphor was elegant for a child, constructing biological frameworks to support healing at scales too small for normal intervention, medicine that operated at the intersection of engineering and biology. I've never heard of that treatment, and water creatures' parts mostly have healing properties but don't surpass a normal healer's skill. Although the idea of using specific tissue that sticks directly to the mana processing system sounds quite interesting if it really acts that way when entering the body, the second expert admitted. The grudging professional interest was evident. Finally, we need to infect him with a blue fungus that grows on mana-eater herbs, those used to reduce mana sickness. That would help eliminate the high concentration functioning as toxins, Ren explained. That blue plague that causes problems every 4-year cycle with our anti-mana medicine? Yes, it will naturally absorb the anti-mana medicine, or in other words, the plant extract, intoxicating him. Once crystals dissolve with the processed tentacles, we can ask healers to help him endure and heal his kidneys a bit. The first expert approached with evident curiosity. How do you know so much about beasts and those rare functions being so young? He asked. The question carried weight beyond simple professional interest. This was knowledge that typically required specialized study. Ren hesitated for a moment, considering how much it was convenient to reveal now that they were in a hurry. I receive information from my beast, something similar to what yours do, he finally responded, surrounded by Julius and the girls who already knew more or less about his little huge encyclopedia. But there are priorities before explaining more about that. We need to act soon. The first expert seemed genuinely intrigued. Do you really think that combination of treatments could work? In theory they should, yes, Ren nodded. In what order? The second expert asked, clearly considering the possibility. The shift in tone was significant. From skeptical dismissal to cautious professional interest, recognition that desperate circumstances might justify experimental approaches. First, the tentacles and powder to eliminate the crystals. Then healer treatment along with secretions to prevent more damage and new crystalline formations. Finally, fungus, when healers have finished regenerating his kidneys enough to deal with intoxication. Ren continued explaining. Each step must be completed before the next, because methods can interfere with each other if applied simultaneously. Especially the fungi. They can die against the tentacles and will grow very aggressively if they receive healing energy. Julius looked hopefully between Run and the experts. Would it be possible to get those materials? The experts considered the question carefully. The materials he mentions are rare, not because those beasts can't be obtained, but because they aren't normally used, the first admitted. But if they can really do what he describes, it should be possible to urgently order beasts from exotic food markets or from some collections of rare beasts for different rich collectors. It would be worth trying, the second completed, because the alternative is this soldier you care so much about dying in the coming days. Ren approached closer to the table where Xiao lay. I can begin stabilizing his system with the little I have to start treatment, he added. But I know firsthand it's somewhat painful and can create additional stress on his body. The casual reference to first-hand knowledge was both reassuring and deeply disturbing, an experience that suggested personal exposure to dangerous experimental procedures. Do you suggest something for that too? The first expert asked. Essence of any water turtle. Doesn't need to be like Ms. Selfra's black one, Ren responded. Any bronze level will work. Slows all biological processes without stopping them and would give him some extra vitality too. Would give time for each treatment to work appropriately without overwhelming his regenerative system. The experts exchanged another glance, this time with cautious hope. It's the most innovative medical theory I've heard in decades, the second expert murmured, but also the most unfounded with data. Do you want me to convert you into data? Julius asked directly. Let him die. No, both experts admitted. Definitely not. Ren pulled out the first prepared tentacle, feeling the weight of responsibility. While they watched Xiao breathe laboriously on the examination table, everyone in the room realized they had just embarked on a medical experiment that could revolutionize some treatments related to mana processing cores, or that could kill the patient faster than he was already dying. But for the first time since they had seen Xiao's condition, there was hope. Chapter 468, Tamer's War, Pure Dragon. Ren had begun treatment with the help of several healers who applied healing exactly where and how he asked them to, though they were all somewhat confused by the peculiar situation of being guided by an 11-year-old child. His movements were precise and confident, directing his seventh process tentacle towards specific points in Xiao's mana system, while carefully monitoring his body's reactions to each intervention. The tentacle writhed slightly in his grip, a secondary problem from the absorption and preparation process he had to skillfully adjust in real time. Where it touched Xiao's skin, faint wisps of energy began to dissipate, the crystallized mana responding to the absorption properties exactly as predicted. Everything was going surprisingly well. The first treatment was working exactly as Run had predicted, and the mana crystallizations were beginning to dissolve gradually. Small sparkles of light escaped from Xiao's pores as the solidified energy returned to its semi-ethereal state, creating brief rainbow patterns in the air before fading completely. One of the healers wiped sweat from his brow. I've never seen anything like this, he murmured, watching the crystalline formations literally melt away under the tentacle's influence. 20 years of practice in focus, Ren interrupted gently but firmly. Channel your healing energy to his lower left rib area. There's damage accumulating there. A guard came running with additional materials he had been sent to fetch. We only need to extract the connective tissue around the core, and we don't know how to turn the vitality beast into powder, he reported, handing over a bag with components that smelled of concentrated medicine. The guard's confusion was evident in his furrowed brow and the way he held the bag at arm's length, clearly struggling to understand how those creatures reduced to dirt could have medical applications. Ren examined the materials quickly and shook his head, disappointed by the comment. You don't need to do it yourselves, he explained. You just have to let the beast, from which you're going to remove the other tentacles I need, absorb the essence directly. The process was even a bit elegant in its simplicity. The absorption beasts would naturally drain the vitality-rich creature's mana completely, leaving behind the pure vitality powder needed for the treatment. No grinding, no processing, just allowing nature to take its course under slightly controlled conditions. The guard remained somewhat puzzled. His expression was that of someone trying to reconcile how this simple concept was never used before. "Are you sure that?" he began to ask. But as he was about to ask more, a large hand gently moved him out of the way. The king entered through the door. His aura was so intense that within the castle, all the hallways were immediately filled with his presence when he had entered the castle a while ago. The very air seemed to thicken, carrying weight that made breathing feel a bit harder. It was such a strong sensation that, ironically, instead of making his presence more obvious, being close meant that distinguishing his exact location became difficult when perception became saturated. The overwhelming nature of his mana signature created a paradox. Dragarian observed the scene with curiosity, his eyes moving between the healers working. Each healer tensed slightly under his gaze, their movements becoming more deliberate and careful. The casual authority he projected made even experienced medical professionals second-guess their own expertise. "What are you doing with my savior?" he asked Julius directly. "How's the treatment going?" Julius straightened immediately, responding with the automatic respect his father commanded. Even with his missing arm, he managed to convey perfect military bearing. "I brought him with a more complicated condition than expected," he explained. "They're going to have to do many things to try to save him. It seems to be acute anti-mana medicine, poisoning combined with generalized damage in his mana veins and tons of internal crystallizations." Dragarian nodded, processing the medical terminology. But then he noticed Julius's condition more carefully. "How did you lose your arm?" he asked. But when he paid more attention to the room, he was extremely surprised when he realized the child was giving orders to adult healers. The incongruity struck him like a physical blow. This had to be a joke. This was supposedly serious. This wasn't some noble child playing at medicine. This was a complex medical intervention. He didn't let Julius answer about the arm. "Are you all taking things lightly?" he asked with a tone that suggested the situation seemed inappropriate to him. "Why is a child directing this medical treatment if, according to you, it's so critical?" The question carried the weight of royal authority and paternal concern combined. The implication was clear. Either Julius was being reckless with a valued subordinate's life, or there was something insane about this situation that required explanation. Rin immediately felt the change in the environment and the powerful gaze directed toward him, disrupting his concentration from the delicate work. The shift was like having a spotlight suddenly focused on him while performing microsurgery. The first thing he did was complain. Then he carefully withdrew the tentacle he was working with in Xiao's veins and looked toward the king. "I can't work well like this," he murmured with evident irritation, his elevated perception making him feel in more detail what others were saturated to perceive. The room's atmosphere is becoming saturated with a somewhat stagnant mana. Worse than when we were in the hallways is anyone. The complaint was instinctive, born from the frustration of having precise work interrupted by environmental changes beyond his control. It was then that he realized he had been focusing so intensely on Xiao that he hadn't been paying attention to his surroundings. The moment of recognition hit him like cold water. Everyone in the room opened their eyes with concern upon hearing the child complaining about the king's mana. Even the healers stopped their work, frozen in anticipation of the royal response to such unprecedented audacity from someone so young. Luna's face went pale, while Leora looked ready to faint. But Dragarian laughed, clearly entertained by the audacity of the brat. "Are you referring to my mana?" he asked with a challenging smile. The amusement in his voice carried undertones of genuine curiosity. In his decades of experience, very few people had ever complained about his presence, and certainly no children had done so while treating it as a mere environmental inconvenience to their make-believe plays. He deliberately increased his aura, letting out just a hint of threat to intimidate the mischievous, spoiled child, surely the pampered son of some noble he didn't recognize who thought he could play doctor with a seriously ill patient. A small lesson for the lack of respect. The oppression made the room's temperature seem to change. The air grew heavier, pressing down on everyone present. It was the kind of presence that made seasoned warriors kneel and hardened soldiers question their courage. Ren grimaced and squinted his eyes, clearly affected by the increase in the sensation of oppression. Unlike the others who seemed frozen by the display of power, Ren's reaction was more akin to someone dealing with an unpleasant but manageable headache. "Ren," Leora whispered urgently. "Apologize. You're before the king." Her voice carried the desperate edge of someone watching a friend about to step off a cliff. Ren was surprised to fully realize the situation, but before he could say anything, Mushido emerged completely from his head. The king was immediately surprised to see the creature he had never seen despite knowing thousands of different beasts throughout everything he had explored during his travels and missions. The small fungus was unlike anything in his extensive mental catalog of beasts and creatures. Its form defied easy classification. "Mushido," Luna shouted, but there was no response. Mushido was focused on a single thing and began absorbing the residual energy from the environment that had become heavy with Dragarian's concentrated power. The process was subtle at first, barely visible wisps of energy flowing toward the small creature, like iron filings drawn to a magnet. Immediately, the king's azure dragon reacted stronger, beginning to expel more of its energy and cycle it with the small fungus in an almost visible circular mana pattern that none of those present had expected. The interaction was mesmerizing to watch. Where Dragarian's power had been oppressive and stagnant, it now began to flow in graceful spirals, as if the little fungus was teaching his ancient dragon new ways to move its energy. The platinum Qilin also felt strange and began resonating with frequencies that made people feel a relaxed aura. What had been intimidating pressure transformed into something almost musical, harmonics that seemed to calm rather than overwhelm. Luna's cat and Julius's Qilin also acted strangely, their energies synchronizing with the inexplicable phenomenon that was occurring. It was as if Mushido had become a conductor, organizing a chaotic orchestra into perfect harmony. Dragarian felt something he hadn't experienced in decades. His energy began to feel lighter than ever. His enormous power didn't diminish at all, but it became a lot easier to carry, more pleasant to maintain, less intoxicating in its intensity. More pure. The sensation was like removing armor he hadn't realized he was wearing, or taking a deep breath after years of breathing through a cloth. The relief was so profound it was almost emotional. For the first time in longer than he could remember, his power felt like a natural extension of himself, rather than a burden he carried. After the small altercation, the little fungus returned satisfied inside Ren's hair without explaining anything about what it had done. The transition was as smooth as its emergence had been sudden, leaving everyone wondering if they had imagined the entire interaction. But Ren immediately obtained a small but significant buff, a now 25% increase in general elemental control, finally adding wood as the last block. Chapter 469, Tamer's War, Pure Goals. Everyone remained confused by what they had just witnessed, especially Dragarian, who clearly wanted to ask questions about the mysterious creature. The silence stretched uncomfortably as everyone processed what had just occurred. Healers exchanged glances, their professional composure shaken by witnessing something that defied their understanding of beast behavior and mana manipulation. Run, with cold sweat beading on his forehead, breathed deeply and said with an awkward voice, "Now it's much better for working." The words came out strained, as if he were trying to convince himself as much as everyone else. His hands trembled slightly as he reached for the next tentacle, the weight of royal attention still pressing against him despite Mushido's intervention. But he took a long breath. He had to save Xiao now. He immediately returned to the treatment, trying to ignore everyone present while concentrating on the delicate process. The work required absolute precision. Each movement of the tentacle had to be guided by the knowledge that flowed through him like an underground river. The crystallized mana responded more readily now, dissolving in gentle spirals of light that dissipated harmlessly into the purified air. Julius realized the tension had dropped thanks to the new pure energy and began explaining to his father about Run, the battle they had fought before his arrival, and how he had lost his arm during the confrontation with Cashin and Ravenspire. He spoke quietly. His voice had a measured cadence that tried to avoid disturbing Run. The story unfolded piece by piece. The desperate defense of the city, the appearance of the corrupted forces, Ren's unexpected abilities, and the brutal use of even bio-weapons to attain victory. Julius's missing arm served as a constant reminder of how close they had all come to complete disaster. When Dragarian finished hearing the entire story from Julius' POV, he looked clearly entertained by his son's and the others' adventures, but especially an 11-year-old boy helping to defeat Karzan. He murmured with amusement. Interesting. His eyes lingered on Run with new appreciation, seeing past the child's small frame to something far more significant. The casual way the boy worked with materials that would challenge experienced healers and the confidence in his movements despite the royal scrutiny said a lot. But then he looked at Xiao lying on the treatment table, and his face changed completely. "I hope your strange child genius can cure him," he said with a seriousness that contrasted with his previous humor. "Xiao saved my life." The change in tone was immediate and absolute. Gone was the entertained monarch. In his place stood a king who understood the weight of debts that could never be repaid, the value of those rare individuals willing to sacrifice everything for duty. He moved closer to the table, observing the delicate work that Run was now performing more calmly in a room with energy equally intense but more breathable. The king's presence, no longer oppressive, seemed to settle around them like a protective barrier. "Let me tell you what he did a few months ago, so that more people remember his bravery in the worst-case scenario." Xiao POV. While Dragarian began his tale, Xiao, who was being treated but remained in a state of semi-consciousness, found himself relatively calm in the depths of his mind. He could barely sense the activity around his body, the gentle probing of healing energy, the careful manipulation of his damaged mana channels. If he had to die after what he had managed to accomplish, at least he would be happy to have reached where he had reached. A silver rank in the Platinum Ring. The achievement felt surreal even in his current state. How many silver rank tamers could claim to have survived in territory meant for beings 2 full ranks above them? How many had walked among creatures that could erase them with a casual move and lived to tell the tale? He had fulfilled his most important mission, had saved the king when he was most needed, and had contributed to the kingdom through it. The satisfaction of duty completed was a warm weight in his chest, more comforting than any physical healing. Whatever happened now, whatever price his body demanded for the risks he had taken, it had been worth it. The only thing that saddened him was that he had never managed to go with Run to see him directly explore those difficult places in the different ways he had told him about during their training sessions. Those conversations felt vivid in his memory now, more real than the medical procedures being performed on his body. Ren's animated descriptions of beast ecology, his theories about mana flow patterns, the way his eyes lit up when discussing the interconnected relationships between creatures and their environments. He had remained with simple imagination from Ren's accounts, never truly exploring with him the complex ecological theories he had described with such emotion. The regret was sharp but not bitter. At least his last mission had been extraordinarily extravagant. A few months ago, the decision crystallized in Xiao's mind with the sharp clarity that only desperate situations could provide. He would find the king, even if it killed him. Stupid, he muttered to himself while checking his supply pouches one more time. I really am. He knew he would most likely regret this. His camouflage raptor shifted nervously beside him, its scales rippling through muted browns and grays as it sensed his agitation. Don't give me that look, Xiao sighed at the beast. You think I don't know this is insane? But what's the alternative? Go back and watch the kingdom tear itself apart while we sit on our asses waiting for a miracle. The raptor's only response was a low rumble that somehow managed to convey both loyalty and exasperation. Xiao appreciated that about the beast. They never tried to pretend, but had to follow him anyway. His mist owl, still fused with him, provided a constant stream of sensory information that painted the world in shades of danger and opportunity. The enhanced perception was both blessing and curse. He could see threats coming from greater distances, but he could also see exactly how outmatched he was by everything around him. Right then, Xiao said, shouldering his pack with grim determination, "Let's go find a king in a mountain-sized haystack." The journey through the first gold ring proved surprisingly manageable, though Xiao suspected that had more to do with Ren's info than his skill. The lingering scent of giant cat bear marking fluid continued to work its magic on the golden noses, keeping them locked in their defensive formations. Xiao moved between the towering creatures like a ghost, careful to maintain the slow, deliberate pace that wouldn't trigger their predatory instincts. "At least the boy's tricks are reliable," he murmured, pausing in the shadow of a particularly massive golden nose whose horn gleamed like a spear tip in the strange, mana-saturated light. The creature's breathing was so slow and deep that Xiao could feel the ground vibrate with each inhalation. This close, he could see the intricate patterns in its fur, the way mana seemed to flow up and down through its body like a tree with luminous blood. It was beautiful in its own alien way and utterly terrifying. His raptor shifted anxiously inside him. The beast's natural camouflage abilities were impressive, but against gold-rank creatures with enhanced senses, stealth became a difficult job. "Easy," Xiao whispered, more to himself than to his companion. "We're just tourists here. Nothing to see, nothing to fear." The lie tasted bitter in his mouth, but lying to himself that all this mission was possible had kept him moving. Why stop now? As they moved deeper into the golden rings, Xiao began to notice changes in the landscape. The mana density was increasing gradually, like walking into deeper water. "No wonder Dragarian likes to rest here," he mused, watching a group of golden noses absorb mana with the patience of living statues. "It's like a massive spa for anything that can handle the pressure." The thought brought him back to his mission. If the king had been here regularly, there had to be signs, traces of his presence that someone with the right skills could follow all the way to find him. Xiao activated his owl's enhanced vision, scanning the ground for disturbances. Royal feet may have left distinctive marks, especially when carrying the weight of 2 platinum beasts. The compressed earth, the subtle displacement of mana flows, the lingering scent of power, all of it could be read like a book if you knew the language. "There," he breathed, spotting a depression in the soft earth near a cluster of particularly large golden noses. The outline was old, but unmistakably human, and large enough to belong to someone carrying serious power in their steps. His raptor scales shifted to match the exact color and texture of the surrounding soil, a nervous habit that Xiao had learned to recognize as his companion's way of saying, "We should think this through again." "I know," Xiao whispered, "but we're committed now." Chapter 470, Taming the Gold 2 Ring. The transition to the second gold ring was marked by a fundamental shift in the ecosystem that left Xiao momentarily breathless. Where the first ring had contained patches of golden noses scattered across varied terrain, the second ring was dominated by a single, massive forest of the creatures. They had evolved here, grown larger and more sophisticated. Sweet dragon of... Xiao caught himself before the curse could fully form, aware that even whispered words might carry farther than intended in this place. The golden noses here stood at least twice as tall as their younger cousins. Their multiple trunks together were now thick enough that a dozen men almost couldn't wrap their arms around them. Their golden horns had developed intricate branching patterns that created a canopy of deadly spikes high overhead, while their long snouts had gained longer beaks that glowed faintly with accumulated mana. Most unsettling of all, they moved a lot more. Not quickly, not dramatically, but with a deliberate coordination that transformed the forest into a living labyrinth. As Xiao watched, a section of the forest shifted position, the massive creatures stepping in perfect unison to close what had been a corridor through their ranks. They're not just joining against predators, Xiao realized with growing unease. They're actively managing their territory together. His raptor's camouflage flickered nervously between different patterns before settling on something that approximated bark texture. Xiao pulled out his remaining vial of marking fluid, noting with dismay how little remained. The original mixture had been calculated for crossing the first ring's patches of golden noses, not navigating an entire forest of their evolved cousins. "Going to have to make this stretch," he muttered, applying the smallest amount he could manage while still maintaining the sense of effectiveness. The larger golden noses also reacted differently to the marking fluid than their smaller relatives had. Instead of simply entering defensive mode, they began a low, thrumming communication that resonated through the ground like distant thunder. The sound was felt more than heard, a vibration that seemed to bypass his ears entirely and speak directly to his bones. "They're talking to each other," Xiao whispered, fascination overcoming fear. "Getting ready to fight together against him?" The conversation, if that's what it was, continued for several minutes before gradually fading into silence. When it ended, Xiao found that pathways had opened through the forest, corridors between the massive trunks that hadn't existed moments before. "They letting me pass?" It seemed impossible, but the evidence was undeniable. The evolved golden noses were actively facilitating his passage, creating a safe route through their domain. The question was why. His owl's enhanced senses caught something else, then a familiar footprint near a big clawed one, both beneath layers of earth and mana. Being followed? Following? Dragarian had passed this way, but not recently. "The trail's getting old," Xiao murmured. "But at least we know we're going the right way." As they moved, luckily with ease, deeper into the forest of evolved golden noses, Xiao began to understand the true scope of it. The creatures here weren't just larger than their first-ring cousins. Their society, if it could be called that, operated on principles that suggested some intelligence rather than mere instinct. They had architecture, crude but deliberate arrangements of their bodies that created structures with clear purposes. Some formations seemed designed for maximum mana absorption, with the creatures positioned to create resonance patterns that amplified the ambient energy. Others appeared to be defensive arrangements, overlapping fields of their horns that would make approaching certain areas suicidal for any potential threat. It seemed that maybe the creatures were intelligent enough to know not to mess with the human who occasionally hunted their predators and passed through. Perhaps Xiao, being similar in form, had the luck of being feared by them, whether that was the reason or something else entirely. Xiao continued along the long straight path for several hours until he reached near Gold Ring 3. The realization struck him gradually. These creatures had developed not just size and coordination, but memory. If they remembered Dragarian's previous passages, if to them, humans weren't prey or competitors, but forces of nature that occasionally swept through their domain. Better to facilitate their passage than risk drawing their attention. "Smart," Xiao murmured, appreciating the elegant simplicity of the possible solution. "Very smart." The transition to the third gold ring hit Xiao like a slap of evolutionary reality. "What the?" he murmured, stopping at the edge of what had once been familiar territory. The landscape had completely transformed. Where enormous trunks of golden noses had once existed, now rose a true forest of incredible vegetal giants that defied all logic of proportions. The new trees stretched toward the sky like living columns, their 15 trunks together forming circumferences so wide that they would need 100 people to surround them. But the real surprise wasn't just their size. They moved up in the food chain, Xiao whispered, his enhanced senses picking up the subtle changes in the ecosystem and the corpses. The trees had become the predators. His camouflage broke for a moment, his scales adopting nervous patterns that couldn't decide between mimicking bark or earth. The evolved golden noses had grown to become something that could no longer serve as food for the giant cat bears, even if they had leveled up. Their main trunks had become so massive that the super thick bark had so little nutrition, mana, that it wasn't worth it. The beaks no longer even reached the ground, and the horns had transformed into appendages for catching prey. But most striking were the spherical formations that hung from their peaks like enormous, grotesque, glowing fruits. These spheres pulsed with concentrated golden light, clearly specialized organs for accumulating and processing mana. The legendary mana fruits, Xiao murmured, fascinated despite the danger. They developed external organs to accumulate the mana concentration necessary for the first evolution to platinum. Each fruit represented years of accumulated power, a crystallization of the creature's evolutionary ambition. Some glowed brighter than others, suggesting different stages of development or perhaps different intended purposes. The beasts always wanted to advance, and Platinum Ring 1 was the only thing these creatures had on their minds. These monstrosities weren't even the worst he would see yet. The Platinum Rings. Xiao, being Silver 3 in his strongest beast, could be in Silver Ring 3 without major problems. His beast, having matured, allowed him to be in Gold Ring 1 with little difficulty. And now, being a double thanks to Run, Gold Ring 3 was a limit where he wouldn't feel too affected. The problem would be the 3 Platinum Rings. During the journey, that would be twice as long as that of the Gold Rings. Xiao would have to endure increasingly worse mana concentrations while hiding from terrible beasts. Each ring represented exponentially increasing danger, not just from the creatures, but from the mana itself. His body, enhanced though it was, had limits. The anti-mana potions in his pack might not be enough even for the one-way trip there. His raptor stirred restlessly, sensing his apprehension. The beast's natural instincts were screaming warnings about the mana density ahead, about creatures that existed beyond their ability to survive. "I don't love it either," Xiao whispered, more to himself than to his companion. "Still, we've come too far to turn back now. First, he would have to survive this legendary forest."